Spawn Laboratory located in Dadeville, Alabama. I studied agronomy at Auburn University, and this is Andrew. He helps us a lot here at the farm.
Hey there, I'm Andrew Reynolds. I'm a recent horticulture graduate from Auburn 2020, and I help produce these mushroom bags here. They are ready to fruit spawn bags. We produce a variety of cultures.
So how did you learn all about this process?
I taught myself. So this actually all started in a spare bedroom at my house. I basically built what we call a laminar flow hood, which is just one of these filters kind of built into a cabinet, and you can sit it on a table and you can work with petri dishes and stuff in front of it. So I really like eating mushrooms. I actually started growing mushrooms before I came to Auburn. And when I was at Auburn, I kept trying to kind of find an outlet at school to grow mushrooms, and it was difficult to do that. I don't know of any professors there that are cultivating mushrooms. I know of one extension agent that is pretty familiar with it. So I met a guy who actually he was a 50-50 owner in this business with me for a while, and I ended up buying him out. But his family owns this property.
Okay.
So I met him, he saw the skills I had, and he was like, hey, we've got a building. Do you want to make this happen? So we did. And this was actually an old True Green building here. Everything in this room was empty. I mean, it was a big storage building. They had just chemicals everywhere, fertilizer, pesticides. So we had to clean it all out. I framed everything in here. I built our autoclave. All these filters are basically they're new surplus items. So I got most of this stuff off of eBay, secondhand. I mean, all the fans and blowers that are running in here were given to us either for free or we salvaged them from somewhere. I mean, everything's just kind of been slapped together around here.
Oh, it looks great.
Yeah, thanks.
It looks great.
Yeah, but and then we have a few. We've expanded a lot since we began. I mean, like I said, we started in my spare bedroom. At first, when we were filling these bags with dry material, we were doing it all by hand. So now we have this really fancy bagger, and this unit, there's only like 12 of these in the world right now. There's a guy in Kansas named Eric Myers who's designing some mushroom equipment. And basically it's just a machine that meters our dry substrate materials into our bags. And what we put in our bags is a soybean hull, and that's just an animal feed. It's sold at the local farm co-op in Notasulga. And then hardwood fuel pellets. And that is also a pelletized material that's sold as fuel for like furnaces for heating homes. So we put these in the hopper up here in the top of our bagger, and this machine just dispenses the correct amount of material into one of our bags.
Yeah, so where it would take an entire day to do a round of bags, we can now do 100 or more bags in about an hour.
Yeah. So we've gotten way faster. If you walk around this corner, you'll see the autoclave that we cook all of our bags in. And that's a home-built autoclave. It's a low-pressure autoclave. It runs at about 2 psi, and we can fit about 30 bags per drum.
So those bags are folded up and placed in a specific pattern in these repurposed drums. They're connected to the boiler that's outside. There's also a cold air line that goes through to cool them down if they've cooked overnight.
Andrew, could you grab one of those cooked bags to show them?
So once they get cooked, they come out like this. And it actually pretty much seals itself in there so that there's no contaminants that reach the food. And then when we want, we can open it up and put our inoculum into the bag in there and feed it whatever we need to.
So about how much do you ship out per week? Let's do pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID, 150 a week probably. And right when COVID hit, that got cut into half. And we're ramping back up pretty strong now though. We're at full production. right now is about 240 bags per week, just with this 4-drum system here. But we're putting 4 more drums in. A lot of our orders come in like at one end of the month, because we actually offer free deliveries once a month around the area. So what it's been recently is just really hard hitting, make as many bags as we can for 2 weeks, and then kind of like clean up, regroup, get our substrate filled back up and everything, and wait for the next big rush.
So who's your typical market?
Farmers.
Who's buying these farmers?
Farmers are our main clients, yeah. So regionally, I would say Atlanta, Birmingham, Mobile, Fairhope area, down into South Florida, some people have gotten stuff from us. Even up into Chicago, we've had people wanting blocks. But our biggest clients are in Birmingham and Fairhope. And then we've actually just took on a new client in Atlanta that's really big too. So most of the mushrooms in Alabama, I would say, originate in this lab. At least most of the cultivated mushrooms. There's a big...
Yeah, the gourmet mushrooms. We
Yeah.
don't produce portobellos.
No, that's true. Yeah, so, and that's a good distinction to make. This is a gourmet mushroom laboratory, meaning when I say gourmet, the varieties that we grow typically have a really short shelf life, so they're not grown on these massive operations that are like up in Pennsylvania. The portobello mushrooms, or agaricus is the genus that's typically grown on those farms. Some of those guys are producing like 1 million or more pounds of mushrooms a year. They're growing on cow manure, and those mushrooms are really easily shippable. So they're cheap, and they can stay cold and stable for a long time. But the mushrooms we grow have a very short shelf life, and they're pretty much only grown regionally and locally. You can't really get a good quality gourmet mushroom sent to you by like a big food distributor. They do sell them, but they look pretty bad. They're kind of beat up.
Yeah, we've seen them in some retail store before, but they're never as high of quality as we can produce fresh off the block and watch it grow on the counter.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, it's similar to like lettuce. You know, when you buy lettuce at the store, it usually doesn't stay very good for very long. In a week, it's wilting. But if you get it from the farm, you might have that lettuce for 3 weeks before it goes bad. And the same is true with mushrooms. And these mushrooms that we're growing are particularly fragile. Most of what we grow is in the genus Pleurotus, and that's an oyster mushroom, if you've ever heard of that. There's lots of different varieties of that particular type of mushroom. There's pink oyster mushrooms, gold oyster mushrooms, blue oyster mushrooms, green oyster mushrooms, tarragon oysters, white oysters, gray oysters, brown oysters. It's a lot of variety in that particular genus. It's also a very easy mushroom to grow. The mycelium is extremely aggressive, and that's what most of our farmers are buying. We also produce some other varieties, shiitake being one, chestnut mushrooms being another. Shiitake is Lentinula edodes, chestnut is Pholiota adiposa, and then the other big commercial variety we produce is called the Piapino mushroom, and the Latin name of that is Agroscipe azurita. Other than that, we got a bunch of other varieties. We got some varieties that we actually found locally in Auburn. One of our best oyster mushroom varieties actually came from Chihuahua State Park. And then if you actually go look at that board, there's a picture of all the names of all the varieties that we have. But most of those are just sort of novel, or they don't really produce that well commercially. So most of those don't get grown very often. But we do have a big culture library, which is basically just refrigerated petri dishes that have mycelium growing on them. And I think we have about 85 different varieties now. So in addition to ready-to-fruit blocks, we also sell mycelium in various other forms and intended to be planted into its own substrate. And any mycelium that's grown on something that's intended to be planted into another substrate is called spawn. So this is a bag of wheat seeds that has mycelium growing on it. So we call that grain spawn. We also, I'll show you a picture when we go in there, or I'll show you the product when we go in the other room. We have little woodworking dowels, little birch woodworking dowels that we grow mycelium on. That's called plug spawn. And that allows people to go down a log and drill holes in a log and then plant mycelium into a log. Sawdust spawn is just a ready-to-fruit bag that instead of growing mushrooms off of the bag, we take the mycelium, break it up, and plant it into another food source or substrate.
So the farmer gets that bag and then they plant it on a log in the ground? How do
They could. So a farmer...
They make tools specifically for plugging the sawdust spawn into logs. It's a 5/16 plunger device. And so there will be farmers, you get more bang for your buck if you get the sawdust bags and then plant those into a log, because you want to put 50 holes into a log. It's about that big. But for ease of access for like a homeowner or something, you just do the little dowels and then put those in there. But then you can also take the sawdust spawn and break it over like straw or hay that's been sterilized.
Yeah, and so if a farmer, typically what farmers are buying is what we call a ready-to-fruit block. And that is just mycelium growing on sawdust. And it's already completely consumed or colonized the substrate of the food source. Typically when a farmer buys one of these, it doesn't have stickers. These are just retail stickers that have instructions on them, kind of more about our company. So a farmer will just get a bunch of totes full of these bags. And when they get them, they typically have some type of greenhouse or fruiting chamber, some type of place where they control the environment, typically for fresh air and humidity. So to get one of these to work, you just need fresh air, humidity, and some light. Not nearly as much light as you need to grow plants. And all you gotta do is cut this bag open, push the air out of the bag, and wait. Really, that's it. And within 1 to 3 weeks, you get about 2.5 pounds of mushrooms growing off this block here. And you usually get 2 to 3 harvests off of one block. And each harvest is about half the weight of the harvest previous to it. So if we get 2.5 pounds on our first flush, we call it, the second flush is gonna be about 1.25 pounds. And then a lot of farmers don't really go to the third production cycle because the mushrooms get kind of small. And a lot of times these blocks will actually start to have contaminant molds growing on them. Usually it looks like green or pink or something, yellow, and that can spread to their other healthy blocks in their production system. But then this material inside of the bag makes a really great compost after you grow mushrooms on it. We have a great compost pile outside. Plants love it. We're actually looking into getting a in-vessel composter down the hill. So we have some greenhouses we're setting up. We have like 10 of them, and we're building a little complex that we're gonna start working with seasonal mushroom production. So a lot of the people that we sell these bags to, they spend a lot of money maintaining the coolness of their rooms. It's really hot in Alabama, as we all know, and it's hard to grow mushrooms in the middle of the summer unless you're spending a lot on HVAC. So we don't really have any interest in doing that. Our main business model is supporting mushroom farmers, but we are going to start growing some of our own mushrooms, just to supplement our own income, as well as help teach farmers how to do this the most low-tech way possible. So after our bags are cooked and then inoculated with whatever species of fungus we're trying to grow, they get placed into this pass-through and then put on a shelf. And they sit on the shelf until they are ready to go out the door. And typically that takes anywhere between 6 and 14 days.
So what'll happen is they start off, you saw the cooked bags. And so the mycelium will go throughout the bag and then they'll start to cover it. So this one still has a few more days until it's ready to fruit again. And then we'll slap the instructions on it and all that stuff. So basically you want the mycelium to cover all of the food source, because that's what the mushrooms are fruited from, is the stress of them thinking that they don't have any more food. And so once they think that they've run out of food to eat, they send out their fruits.
Yeah, we're basically building artificial logs when we make these. So we fill that with sawdust and then some supplement in the form of a soybean hull, nitrogen supplement, and we cook it. So there's no invader fungi or bacteria present. And then we use grain spawn to inoculate our sawdust bags. So we grow mycelium on grain because it breaks up really easily, just like this. And that's basically our starter for these bags. And when we open them in the clean room, we just pour a little bit of this in the bag. Kind of like making sourdough bread.
And they'll start to get inoculated. This is basically where the first of those grains were in this bag. See, it hasn't even spread to this side yet.
Yeah, and you know, just so everybody understands, mushrooms are actually a fruiting body of a fungus. So when you pick a mushroom, it's very similar to picking an apple off of a tree. You don't harm the tree, or the mycelium, which is what the white stuff in this bag is when you pick a mushroom. In fact, the mushroom kind of wants to be picked because mushrooms make spores, and that's how the life cycle continues. And like Andrew said, mycelium typically does not want to make mushrooms unless it's run out of food. It is a stress response. Mycelium's completely happy just existing as mycelium as long as it has food to spread into. But then when it runs out and a few other triggers happen, it's a perfect storm for mushrooms to form. Pretty cool. Most of these we find growing on downed trees outdoors. So for instance, one of our brown oyster varieties was found by a girl named Taylor. So we call it the Taylor oyster. And that was in Chihuahua State Park. It's one of our best varieties.
So how do you know, because you just found that mushroom, how do you know it's edible and it won't harm you?
It's similar to plants again. So I'm the vice president of Alabama Mushroom Society. So I hang out with a lot of people that know a lot more about mushroom identification than I do. I mean, I know more than the average person, but cultivation is definitely my strong suit. Whereas I know some real experts with identification knowledge. So if anybody's interested in identifying mushrooms, I would recommend getting on the Facebook group called Alabama Mushroom Society. And that's just a really active group that people can post pictures of mushrooms to. We have experts from all over the world that will contribute and help identify whatever you've posted pictures of. And it's also a nonprofit based out of Birmingham, but since the virus has started, a lot of our meetings have kind of not been in person anymore. So the Facebook group is the most active segment or portion of that group, the best way to get involved. But you know, your question was, how do we know what we found? So again, similar to plants.
Take a cutting of mushroom.
Yeah.
Clone them.
It's exactly right. So we're not just looking for any mushroom outdoors that's edible. First off, a lot of mushrooms that grow outside that people forage for cannot be cultivated. And that's because a lot of fungi are what we call mycorrhizal, which means they associate with a plant. So they can't, you can typically get the mycelium to grow in pure culture, but to get it to form mushrooms is nearly impossible. In fact, I don't know anybody that's done it.
Like chanterelles, morels.
A lot of lactarius mushrooms, lots of amanitas. Most of the choice wild mushrooms cannot be cultivated, except for a few. And those are the oyster mushrooms and lion's mane, being the two that we find most around here. So we find a lot of them just walking around, but we don't clone very many of them or take a cutting of. And the reason being is because most of them just aren't very impressive. But if we find a particularly big specimen, something that's growing somewhat out of season, like lion's mane I said earlier is a cool season mushroom. So the last 2 years we've found a lion's mane growing in the middle of July on a tree in Auburn. So we have that one, and we're working to see if we can get production going in the warmer months of the year with that variety. As far as oyster mushrooms are concerned, this was just a really, really big, impressive cluster that we found, and it was in great shape. And so it was like, hey, we're gonna clone that one, and we did, and it performed extremely well. So, in our climate at least, I mean, it's one of the only mushrooms that people have been having a lot of success with this summer of our clients that grow outdoors in greenhouses. Everything else that we have, for the most part, is more commercially available varieties that people kind of share around, and they really like it to be like 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And the characteristics on those mushrooms are great when they get what they want. But if you're trying to grow outdoors, it's not going to work right now. So we do keep a lot of mushrooms that we found locally around. A lot of them haven't even been tested for fruiting potential yet. But it's really easy to clone mushrooms. You just crack a mushroom open, take a dental pick, pull a little bit of tissue out of the stem, and place it on a petri dish. And then the mycelium, There's actually, I said tissue. Mushrooms or fungi don't have differentiated tissues. They're all mycelium. So mycelium basically just turns into a knot and forms a mushroom. So if you rip a mushroom open, pluck a little bit of mycelium out of it and place it in a petri dish, it just revegetates and starts growing as mycelium again. And sometimes we have to clean it up a little bit with an antibiotic. There might be a little bit of bacteria in there. Sometimes there's some other molds that'll hitch a ride. So if we're cloning a mushroom, we typically try like 10 to 15 different little petri dish plates, because a lot of them are going to be contaminated with stuff that we don't want to grow. But a few of them typically work, and then we can save that culture in a refrigerator, and we have it for a long time. I know some culture libraries have had mushrooms for like 80 years or something. Over time, they can lose fruiting potential, but a lot of these organisms live for a very long time in the environment. For instance, if we were to plant mycelium into a log, we wouldn't get mushrooms for 6 months to a year, because the mycelium has to consume or colonize that log first before mushrooms will form. And I think the biggest organism on the planet is a mycelial mat of a honey mushroom, and I think it's in Oregon. I can't remember where it is exactly, but it's in the US. You can see it from space. Honey mushroom is Armillaria. I'm sure you're familiar with that one, Dr. Wright. Armillaria, it's bad in like orchards and stuff. The honey mushroom, it attacks trees.
I don't know that one.
Well, it's an edible, not the best ever, but yeah, that's the one I'm talking about up in, I think it's Oregon. It's like, yeah, it's like 2,200 acres maybe, I think. Yeah, I think that's the number. So it's just outrageously huge. But yeah, it's just one cell wall thick mycelial mat. Impressive organisms. I've seen mycelium bust out of these bags. So if you were to take one of these bags home and just forget about it, the mushrooms would probably break out. I've seen them pop out of these filters that break the filter patch off. I've had mycelium growing in a mason jar before. It's unscrewed the top of the lid so it could get out. They're pretty impressive. I've seen mushrooms break concrete too, with the amount of pressure they can exert. You can see some of these bags are getting a little old too. They're starting to grow mushrooms in them.
Then I found the train wrecker the other day at the Arboretum.
Oh yeah.
The one that eats pine.
Mm-hmm.
It's called that because it would bust apart train ties. Yeah.
Neolentinus lepidus is the name of that one. Yeah, nicknamed the train wrecker. We've got that one to clone too. So that'll be train wrecker Andrew. Here's some reishi mushrooms too that y'all can see. They're starting to grow in the bag. So these grow in the bag. And they will grow little fingers all up in that bag.
Antlers.
Yeah, antlers. Sell for like $10 an ounce dry. And so inside of these bags is really high CO2, because fungi are actually respiring. So they breathe kind of like we do. I mean, they don't have lungs, but they're putting out CO2, taking in oxygen. But they don't need nearly as much oxygen as we need. I think the CO2 concentration in these bags is like 20,000 parts per million, approximately. And I think in this room is probably more like, or outside is like 400. In this room is probably a little elevated because of these bags. But way higher, kind of like in the soil or in a log. And these would just form stems in the bag. And so if you look at these bags, you'll notice that these mushrooms don't look very healthy. And that's just because they're in a really high CO2 environment. So if we just cut that bag open and let them start to grow, the caps would get way bigger and really nice. If you ever see mushrooms that look really noodly, or they have like really long stems and not very nice caps, it's because they were grown without enough fresh air. Some mushrooms are grown that way on purpose though. So have y'all seen like an enoki mushroom? You ever heard of that? They have tiny little caps. They usually sell them in like Asian markets. You've seen them before? Yeah, they look like long noodles. And if you find that mushroom grows here wild, if you find it, it looks nothing like that. It's like tan colored, usually has a slimy cap, really big cap, almost like a brown stem. But when you grow it in the dark with high CO2, it's just all white stem. So, and actually all the mushrooms that you find at the store as far as portobellos are concerned and button mushrooms, those are all the same species. So the white buttons, the little baby bellas, the big portobellas. It's all Agaricus bisporus, just grown in different environments in different ways.
So Andrew, you studied horticulture, so that's a different branch of the plant kingdom. What's it been like learning about this different area of biology?
It's been a learning curve for sure. It's not quite the same as vegetables or fruit, even though it is a fruiting body. I find it's a little bit more like herding tiny livestock. You're trying to get them from one food source to the next so that they can stay alive, and you have to keep all of the baddies away from all the contaminants or other pests. But it's still food production, so people gotta eat. So it's along the same lines.
So are there some principles or concepts that you think that you learned in horticulture that can still translate over into what you're doing now?
Oh, definitely. Any of the stuff with like greenhouse or nursery management, learning your flow processes, making sure that all of your steps are following the correct order. I mean, we're mixing media. We talked about getting a soil mixer. I mean, it's the same product or the same tools over there. Still got to weigh out, measure all of your substrates. Very, very similar concepts. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they started teaching a mushroom class one day.
That would be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of from your perspective, there's some sort of basic fundamentals and principles that you learn as a part of your time at Auburn that then are very easily translatable even to kind of a broader spectrum of disciplines and professions.
Right. I was told that the degree is only as good as the job that it will get you. What I would also argue is those classes are only as good as what you learn from them. And you can learn all sorts of stuff, whether it's just the material that's in it or the concepts that can be transferred from one focus to the next.
That's great. So it sounds like you've been able to kind of be creative and sort of what you learned at Auburn and then actually apply that to a different path. So you've been able to sort of see the value in what you're learning and how that can apply in a different environment.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, we're not growing peaches here or blueberries, but we are growing food, and I can use all of the core values that I learned in the horticulture program at Auburn and apply them here and make it as best of a place that I can. And then over here, we're trying to rebuild the soil. Next door, this guy owns a dirt company. He'll sell you all kinds of dirt. And so there's been a lot of erosion in this particular side of the farm. And so this was all dirt, you know, when I got here. And then we've been putting any kind of contaminated blocks, like all of these got contaminated from the spawn.
Yeah, occasionally we mess up, and this is where our mistakes go.
Yep, and so we're rebuilding the hill here. And so we have all kinds of fun stuff. So this is a blue oyster that grew off of the blocks, but then we'll also have wild, these are ink caps over here. You can make your own ink with it.
This is our greenhouse complex we're setting up down here too, and this should be operating by the fall. Mushroom blocks.
Yeah, non-contaminated blocks, and then we'll start fruiting mushrooms from there, and we can sell it to a local market or create value-added products. And then what'll be left over is these blocks again. They'll eat up, because mushrooms are basically a form of composting. It's taking the waste of one sector and then turning it into food, and then they'll be dried out hard blocks. So we're going to start breaking those up and turning them into compost as well. Except for it'll be already broken down when you go and add it to stuff. When we win that grant for the Farmers Federation, then that's where the first money is going to go into. Is going to be getting an in-vessel set up.
An eco drum. Are you familiar with those, Dr. Wright?
Well, from Andrew's work.
Okay, cool. That's how I learned about them too. All those greenhouses, or the hoop houses, I guess, whatever you want to call them, the structures, the frames are going to move onto this black area here, and there's going to be gravel in there. And then there will be another covered area where we're going to put the eco drum behind it all, so that our mushroom blocks can go in one side, come out the other, and then get processed into compost. So we're going to build a big shade structure because mushrooms need shade, like 85%, really pretty intense shade. And then we'll probably just do like, it's actually smarter to have your mushroom production sectioned out into little tunnels like this, because then you don't run as much of a risk of contamination or pests. And then the fruiting cycle or cropping cycle is so short that, you know, we start 1 week on one end, by the time we get back to that end, it's ready to fill up again. Just gonna be seasonal. So it's just gonna kind of be like first come, first serve as far as the mushrooms go. Our main clients are farmers, and we intend to not compete with them. That's not what we're trying to do. We're more or less trying to lead by example, and I think Andrew mentioned this earlier, we're planning to make a lot of value-added products from the mushrooms we grow. Actually, the thing we've been working on most is mushroom jerky. So you can dry an oyster mushroom and then rehydrate it in some marinade and boil it a little bit, and then dehydrate it again, and it's like a seasoned, dried piece of mushroom.
So vegan-friendly.
Vegan jerky, that's right.
So thanks for stopping by the Fungi Farm. We're really glad you guys came by.
Yeah, and if you want to learn more about our operation, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and we have a website, www.fungifarmllc.com. Thanks a bunch, and War Eagle!